This is Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash, a podcast about everything that happens after Get Push. Ship It is brought to you by Fly.io, the home of changelog.com. Launch your apps close to your users all around the world. Learn how at Fly.io.
Hello and welcome to Ship It, the podcast all about what happens after you get push. I'm your host, Justin Garrison, and with me, as always, is Autumn Nash. How's it going, Autumn?
Hey, I'm so excited about this episode. Like, Tim Banks, I live for his tweets, and we finally get to virtually meet Tim, and we are going to talk about all the things.
Yes, we went all over the place in this episode, and it was a lot of fun.
Look, it was a roller coaster, okay? I was not prepared for
Surprisingly, we brought it all back to the same spot, which was amazing.
Are you proud of us? Because I'm proud of us. That was a feat. We deserve some sort of award for being able to touch that many topics and do like there were backflips, roller coasters, and we still ended it with tech somehow.
Yeah, and this episode, actually, I think we only are recording or publishing probably half of what we recorded in general because there was so much.
There's so many good clips, and then we stopped recording for all the good stuff. It went even longer.
Yes, Tim was great to have on the show and just generally talk to. If you meet him at a conference or
dude, he is just Tim is. He is a pleasure. That man is a gem, okay? And he not only is he he really knows his stuff technically. He's so amazing technically, but he's also just a totally dope person, hilarious, has the best stories, throws the best shade. He is just a joy to talk to.
And I even wrote down all of his jujutsu championships. And I have a 5-time Pan American champion, 3-time American national champion, and the 3-time something champion that I did not finish writing. It was amazing.
No, but low key though, the way that he will give a talk and he will talk about jujutsu or just regular life stuff and then relate it to tech is like watching someone do magic. He's very good at the people part of tech and teaching and relating it back to real life. He's very, very good at that.
He's very good at being a whole person, and
yes.
Technology is a part of his personhood. And that is amazing because it's not, you're not your job. You are not that thing you just learned. You are an entire person, and all of those things are interrelated and you can tie them together in various ways. And so let's jump into the interview and then we'll come back afterwards with some links.
What's up, friends? I'm here with Kyle Carberry, CTO at Coder.com. So Kyle, I've known Coder as the IDE in the cloud, and over time, you've iterated to become a fully open source cloud development environment, a CDE. How do you explain what Coder is and what it does?
Coder is a platform to provision you a development environment on any cloud infrastructure. That might be in a VM, that might be inside of a container, but Coder is kind of a developer's route to provision infrastructure for them to write software inside of. We started with the IDE, which is kind of like putting VS Code in the browser, which is what most people are certainly familiar with us for. And we kind of funneled that into more of a platform where people provision the infrastructure. And a lot of people do use a web IDE with Coder. A lot of people use a local IDE and just connect in.
Okay, so what are teams coming to you for? Who's coming to you?
What people really come to us for, particularly this problem is really exacerbated if you're a large enterprise, is when you have 500 engineers that are trying to update a version of Python. And instead, we allow one engineer to go through that tedious work of updating some scripts or some Docker container. And then you can actually just deploy that in one click to say 500 engineers and make it really, really simple.
Let's laser focus in on the platform engineer. It is that team's job to provide the best infrastructure, the best platform for their given applications, for their teams. What are some signs or signals for platform engineers to think about when it might be time to consider a cloud development environment like Coder.com.
So as a platform engineer, developers might constantly be opening like IT tickets that their computer isn't working properly. They might constantly want to update dependencies, but that's a big mess. You constantly have to email people across your team to say, hey, Adam, could we update from Java 17 to Java 18? Those are the kinds of problems that people typically have. That's the status quo. You ship people more powerful laptops to improve the build times of your projects. You try to reduce the complexity of your products instead of simply, leveraging better hardware. We believe that the future is leveraging the cloud for a lot of these things. You can get more powerful instances in GCP or AWS that can make the build times faster instantly. You can let one developer create a standardized environment and then distribute it to 1,000 so that when you're updating from Java 17 to 18, it's just a simple pull request. You can co-locate your servers right next to something like S3 or a database that you're using in development so that you get immediate data transfers and it's not slow. Many of our customers, which is a crazy thing to say, but they use absolutely massive monorepos and they get clones that go from like 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour to simply like a minute or 30 seconds. It's just a lot simpler when all of your engineers are standardized on one centralized piece of infrastructure, and then one person can impact the lives of hundreds of engineers. And with that, we don't believe that everything belongs in the cloud. We think that some workloads are really amazing for it, and some are absolutely terrible. Coder should be a self-serve offering to your engineers. It should not be prescriptive, where you migrate all pieces of software development into the cloud. Only the things that really get a lot better by running them in this cloud-native way do we really promote moving.
Well, it might be time to consider a cloud development environment. And open source is awesome, and Coder is fully open source. You can go to Coder.com, get a demo, or try it right now, or even start a 30-day trial of Coder Enterprise. Once again, Coder.com, that's Coder.com, Coder.com.
Thank you so much, Tim Banks, for being on the show today. Tim is we have done 20 minutes of pre-show here, and Tim is not your typical dev advocate, because usually developer advocates will have all the badges from the conferences they've been to in the background. Tim has a line of all of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu championships he's won behind him, and that is just amazing. So, Tim, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, I appreciate it, Justin. Autumn, great to see y'all.
Tim puts the personality in like DevOps, okay? Like y'all are not ready. Like, like if you want like spicy tech tweets, but like with actual personality, like go check out Tim.
Usually we start the show with what software are you responsible for? And I know you've done a lot of things in the past, and you can pick any of them of what you want to talk about, where you want to go with the podcast.
Yeah, give us a brief overview of all the things you do, because you have like such an impressive resume. Like you've done all the things.
So tech is what I do to pay the bills, right? What I am is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. I'm a brown belt, 2-stripe brown belt under Rui Frage at Brazilian Top Team Austin. Crossing my fingers, I hope to make black belt by the end of the year, which would be after 7 years of training, which is kind of quick. I teach jiu-jitsu 5 days a week. I train 6 days a week. So I do a lot of jiu-jitsu. My body hurts all there. I do not have, I have not had in several years on both hands a situation where none of my fingers is dislocated. Currently, it's this knuckle and that pinky.
Dang, Tim.
It's just how it is. But I've been a chef. I've done construction. I've been in the military. I've been all kinds of stuff. And I landed on tech not because I love it. It's okay, but it pays a lot, right?
He's not wrong.
And so I think that framing of how I look at it has given me a lot of perspective on how I do it. Because it used to be like my job is who I am and everything like that. And that became real toxic for me. And I think it's toxic for a lot of people, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So when I talk about my career, it's kind of like, what have I done? Like the hired gun is the thing. I've gone on a lot of places. I've worked in a lot of things. Been some places you've heard of, like Amazon, Dell, Rackspace, like that. I was with the Object Rocket. It was probably one of my more fun jobs. I was with Elastic. Elastic was my last quote unquote actual like engineer job, where I spent most of my day doing engineering stuff and like had a pager and all that kind of things like that. I was a senior SRE there, working on the Elastic Cloud and a lot of their observability pipeline for observability stack, and did some really cool stuff there. And then I left. I went to AWS to become a TAM, and then I was a TAM at Mission. Then I became a principal solutions architect over at Equinix, then principal cloud economist at the Duckbill Group, and then I was lead developer advocate at Dell most recently. So, and it's interesting because like, you can write all the code, you can sling all the bits, you can do whatever. And that's all well and good, right? The thing that I liked the most and that I appreciate the most is talking to people who are consuming the things that I was working on, because then I get context for what we're doing. And I think that's important. A drum you'll hear me beat over and over again in my various posts on Twitter is that that the tech is really the least interesting part of what we do. It's the actual collaboration, communication, interoperation, and getting context and understanding the problems that people are trying to solve, right? Because that is what matters. And tech is just the implementation detail. So it's like, I care less about how many commits you have. I don't really care about what languages. Whatever less than caring is about whatever framework, the JavaScript framework of the week is, I really don't care, right? What I want to know is, well, what are you actually trying to do? Because that's what I want to build off of, and not, what thing are you writing and like blah, blah, blah. I have opinions on tech, but they're largely, based on my experience and therefore just as baseless as everybody else's. I just acknowledge that. I
think what you bring to the table that a lot of people can be very technical, but most people do not know how to be. You bridge your life experience with tech, and the way that you talk about tech, you can relate it to so many other things that makes it relatable and digestible for other people. And I don't think a lot of people have those both people skills, but also technical skills. But you are really good at knowing how to like disagree with somebody and to like really be able to prove your opinion about something, and to then be able to back it up with the technical details, but still make it really digestible and to like communicate it. I think it's really interesting how engineers, especially, and I will gonna point the finger at software engineers. Dang, why you gotta do us like that? Like, well, no, and I'll say because I feel like software engineers have captured most of the attention of the tech community, right? And they, for whatever it's worth, they feel like it's due them. It is software engineers who I see who delineate people into technical or not technical at conferences, right? It is software engineers who I usually say like, oh, if you work in tech, and then they will give a very developer specific point of view, right? And there's a lot more jobs in tech than just software developers, right? And so what I think is interesting is because first of all, my background is operations. I started off with system administrations, things like that, right? So I know how to code. I just, I code like Taylor Swift sings just good enough, I guess, to get the job done. But more importantly, it's like I understand that the code is not the important part. It's like what you're trying to do. So when I talk about things, I'm talking about things at a process level. I'm talking about things at an architectural level. I'm talking about things in like a human impact level, right? And people assume that because I do that I'm not technical. I have that problem too, I think, because being a solutions architect first and then being a software engineer and having a lot of people skills, people are always like, well, you're really good at processes and you're really good at this, but like, and I'm just like, why are we pretending like that's not important? Like the fact that you can talk about those things, like that makes you a better software engineer, a better technical person. Well, people are like, well, yeah, but do you know how to do this like small implementation detail? And I was like, yeah, 20 years ago, like, why do I do that now? It's like, like, here's one thing you're going to catch. I did relate it to jujutsu, right? Somebody's like, yeah, but like, do you know how to do this one specific, submission? And I'm like, well, I would never do that because that's a submission when you have made 48 bad decisions and now you're in this one situation. Like, I would never get there. Like, no, I mean, yeah, I know how to do it, but it's not important. Like, why? But be real, that part, there's like one implementation. I can Google how to do that. Go find it. And if you know where to put it and you know the bigger picture, you know how to string that together. So it's like, yeah, that's cool. But like, let's be real. Half of this job is Googling stuff and getting an example. And so it's like the skill is knowing where to find like what you need, knowing how to talk to people and get the information you need and having the context. It's not that little implementation, but we put so much stress on that implementation. That's not even the hard part. Like context is key. Right. And that whenever I'm mentoring, especially software engineers who want to go to like, hey, I want to be more senior and be staff, whatever, I was like, context. You have to have context. You are very, very specialized in typing on a keyboard a certain way right now. And all of that is just
to get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
If you do not understand the bigger picture beyond what you're typing into the keyboard, if you do not understand the architecture, not just of the software, but of the infrastructure, if you do not understand the business and the financial needs of the business at large and all the pressures that go in there, if you don't understand what the salespeople's pressures are, what the marketing people's pressures are, what the product developers' pressures are, what your customers' pressures are, then you have no context for what you're doing, and you may as well be masturbating when you write code.
But you want to know what, though? I think that's our industry's fault.
Oh, it absolutely is.
To get a job and to be a good junior developer, they just want you to code. Do you know how many times I've been told to just code and not give talks and not do processes better and all that other stuff? Like, I feel like sometimes you get like almost your people skills and your extra stuff like squeezed out of you because they just want you to do the grunt work of coding and they don't let you be all of those things that you just said.
What I think is really interesting about the dawn of generative AI, right? Because the generative AI can do junior dev work.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, right? You give it enough direction, it'll write codes, right? So it's imperative for you to understand the processes and have context, because the grunt work of, writing a Terraform thing based on a problem description is now largely going to be automated away, right? For good or for bad.
So do you think that will change what the industry is looking for? Like, because think about it, like we've all been in the interview process and it's like all leak code and write this code and do this and do that. And now that I think a lot of the dev real jobs have gone away and people are going back to more solutions architect jobs or more engineering jobs, it is just on the small version of skills that is not most of our job that you're tested on. So like, how do you think that will impact like tech and like the roles there are and like how we interview?
Now, I don't know that that's a specific DevRel thing. Like, that's all jobs are now more aligned with making money, right? They all have to show that they're valuable to the company, no matter what they're doing. And most of that value comes from having the context to give impact to your customers, right? Like grow the customers or make them more successful, right? And that doesn't matter if you're doing it in DevRel or as a TAM or as a software engineer. Like, you have to show your value to the company, meaning you fit into the broader whole of things and not just you do that one thing on the keyboard.
But I think as a software engineer, that's all they want you to do a lot of the times is just the one thing on the keyboard.
Well, here's the thing. When you say they, right? A lot of the software engineers place that burden on themselves and then on the other software engineers below them because they weren't necessarily good at giving talks. They weren't necessarily good at communicating. They weren't necessarily good at all the other, what they called soft skills, right? They were just really good at typing on the keyboard.
Because I feel like I've run into that problem over and over again where it's like, well, you're a great solutions architect and you're great this, but like, we need you to just write the code and be a software engineer. And I'm like, how though? Because I feel like that's some of my best skills is that I'm technical and soft. So, and I feel like that's what you guys both bring to the table. So how did you get those skills to like get you, like, because you've both been in tech for like 28 years and 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
And the ageism here.
No, but I think it's cool that you've found a way to make that work for you. How did you find a way to capitalize on all of your skills and not just one of them and to grow a career that way? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the long and the short of it is that, first of all, your ability to network and communicate and relate to others is going to be a huge factor in you finding a job no matter what. If you are a good coder, but nothing else, you're going to have a hard time working on a team. And that's going to come out real quick, right?
Yeah.
So your ability to communicate effectively, right, is critical. Whether it's talking or whether it's writing in comments or whether it's writing in docs and stuff like that. And so it used to be not as critical now, but like one of the things the advent of DevOps has done has emphasized communication as an ideal, right? Now, we still spend a crap ton of money on a bunch of tools so that we don't actually have to talk one with another when we should be doing more talking. But still, the notion that you can work on a team with interoperation and collaboration is still like an idea, right? So that is table stakes, right? You can't just write code. You have to be able to work on a team, right? So that, you're career limited right there if you're not good at working on a team.
I always say engineering is a team sport. Like, it's something that you have to be good at working with other people, because especially when you work in like a very deep team, everybody has their like specialty or a part that they're good at. And if you can't utilize your like teammates and their specialties and work together, you're going to be very slow and not very good at it.
Yeah. And so I think it's the thing I talk about, the debate. I remember when there was debate on the 10X engineer or something like that, right?
But I think that's where the industry is going. They just want this person to write 1 million lines of code. And I'm like, dude, that's not like...
Here's the thing, that you don't need a person to write 1 million lines of code anymore. You don't. Again, that's something that AI is going to be able to do for you, right? What you need a person to be able to do is understand what it is you're trying to do, right? Because that's the only way you're going to be able to give good context for the tools that are going to write the code for you. Eventually, the actual code writing is not even going to happen, right? Because you have a machine talking to a machine. You don't need to write human readable code, right? We are not far away from machine just writing assembly. I'm telling you that right now.
Out of all the jobs that you've done, because you've had a very long like career and you've done a lot of different jobs, what do you feel like, I guess, was your favorite, or the one that you had the most impact, or maybe the one that you learned the most, like out of your whole career?
That's going to be a tie between being a DevOps engineer at Object Rocket and working at Elastic. Actually, no, I'll take that back. I will say the DevOps engineer at Object Rocket. And the only reason I will give that over Elastic is because the DevOps engineer at Object Rocket was a startup that had just gotten acquired. We were developing products, right? And so it was the first time I got to sit there and say, like, this is a product, this is an idea, and we need to bring this to fruition and actually realize this as a thing, right? This was before, Docker existed, but you didn't use it in production for anything stateful. Kubernetes existed, but you didn't use anything. So we ran OpenVZ, which I will still contend that OpenVZ does not get the respect it deserved for being a really awesome open source virtualization product, right? Because they were actually even called OpenVZ containers, right? So we were doing a container management system using OpenVZ and a provisioning thing that we worked together that, me and others cobbled together with Python using like Slack and other stuff like that. So like we had observability, we had automation, we had, chat ops, we had all the things we needed that we wrote ourselves in Python using OpenVZ, right? And we used that to deploy very meticulously and high performant architected deployment of Elasticsearch as a service and MongoDB as a service and Redis as a service, right? And I thought that was real cool. And the funny part was we had like 1, maybe 2 sales engineers. We were talking to customers all the time. We knew our customers, most of them by the all of our like named customers, all our because we knew we had knew them by name. They knew us. We knew them. One of our biggest customers was Tinder, right? Back then, before Tinder got bought by Match.
That's kind of funny.
They used some party boys out of LA. Let me tell you what, boy, when they came in for a customer conference.
Oh, tell us, because I know you have good stories.
Man, look.
What was your favorite Tinder story?
Well, this is my favorite. Hanging out at Elasticon with a good friend of mine now, Patrick Albert, who was the director of operations, or VP of operations, something of operations at the time. And we're hanging out in this pier, and like Elasticon is going on, but it was Microsoft talking about a bunch of stuff, blah, 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 right? So we're sitting there at either end of a table. So Patrick and I were both in the Marine Corps. So we're at either end of this table holding court from a bunch of nerds and hanging out, talking, chatting up all the service workers and stuff like that and everything like that, having a generally good time. And then Patrick's like, hey man, do you have Tinder on your phone? Now at the time I'm married with the kids. I was like, no, I don't have Tinder on my phone. And he's like, well, how are you going to tell me if stuff is working, if you don't have it on your phone? And I'm like, oh man, okay, I guess.
Why he's trying to get you in trouble?
He takes my phone, he installs Tinder on it, and then and I don't know what he does, but he's like, what's your email? Just blah, blah, blah. He goes back, busts out his laptop, and next thing you know, I have Tinder in God mode.
What?
No, even now. Even I still have it on my. Hey Tinder, don't
remove Tim.
If you're listening, just
see. Yeah. This is why like Tim's dating like tweets on Twitter. I'd be so there for it, and I'm like, okay, what happened now?
And so he does this, and now I'm like, oh wow, and now here I am. I'm in San Francisco, and I'm with God mode Tinder, and I'm like, I should no person should have this.
You said power. No person should have. Wait, what is Tinder got? Like, what else was on there? What? I don't need to know.
No, you really don't. I promise you don't.
He said
But what I thought was real cool about that is because, like, you're running it out. Now, we had the 2016 Olympics, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know this about athletes, but they like to have a lot of sex when they're done competing, right? And the people who go to watch it, they're all traveling like that. So we had some very real data sharding issues around performance around hyper local. They used to call it the hot girl problem, right? And so the hot girl problem was whenever a hot girl would go on vacation, right? We would get a hot data shard because she was in a new place and everyone was matching her and she's doing all this kind of like that. And so we'd have huge amounts of data being written to one shard that's allocated to one person who was normally over here when she was, a medium-sized fish in a big pond. And now she goes to a medium-sized city. She goes to Indianapolis or something like that. And now Indianapolis is blowing up, right? Because she's the hottest thing that they've ever seen in 20 years, right? So now we have to figure out why is this shard hot? Oh, hot girl problem, right? And so we had to move stuff like that. So we had to, with knowing this was a thing, we had to have huge preparatory deployments for the 2016 Olympics, right? Because we're going to have all these athletes in one spot and all they want to do is, that. And, when they have the beds, they're supposed to prevent them from doing that or whatever. But
wait.
So
they were doing all this on cardboard beds.
Look, man, you know good as well as anybody else, right? You'll find a way to water, right? There's,
we've just brought two areas of my life together, dating apps and databases, and I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready.
But so dealing with those kinds of real-time data problems, and again, this goes back to understanding the context of what it is you're trying to do. We were writing code so people could get laid. And with that in mind, you had to have that context in mind because what you were doing had very real and big implications on infrastructure, on code, on processes, on observability, and everything like that, right? But if we didn't have that context, we don't understand why this is working like that, and we don't know how to build around it, right?
Which is wild.
And so if you don't understand what it is your customer is trying to do and what their customers are trying to do, you don't have the right context for the things that you need to do to support that.
I think it was 2012. I interviewed at Tinder, not knowing anything.
Yeah, I can already tell you, man. I know you now. I don't know what you're like in 2012, but I can tell you were not Tinder material.
I was not, and I didn't know. I was interviewing a lot of places.
Oh,
the most bizarre interview process I've ever had in my life, where I just showed up and it was small, 2012ish or whatever.
Wait, what is Tinder's what goes on?
No one was there for 20 minutes when I showed up. Literally, the entire office was empty, and then someone came in. They're like, "Oh, I'm here for an interview," and they're like, "Oh, okay, come into this conference." And they're like, "I was just up all night restoring Mongo database dumps that were, that crashed." And then they left the interview 3 times and they got paged, and they're just like, "I have to go solve this problem." They brought in someone that just walked in the door, like, "Hey, come interview this person." And I'm like, "What is going on right now?" And I'm like, "This is not a well-run company." At that point, I knew nothing about it, right? But then also, what came out of that was one of my favorite puzzle questions of operations interviewing was what happens if you chmod -x chmod? And I was like, "Oh, what would you do?" And they're like, "How would you fix that?" And I'm like, "Okay." And so I walked, through what that was just one of the interview questions I remember from that entire episode. But yeah, it was a weird day.
I feel like I must live in boring tech because y'all got stories.
So these are the things that you get when you're dealing operations and not software engineering, because our app developers, people that wrote the interface and wrote all the they didn't have none of these conversations. They didn't do none of that fun stuff, right?
What was the worst outage you've had to deal with as a DevOps SRE engineer? Because you've done some stuff and you're very
I think the worst one that because there were outages that were caused by stuff that wasn't our fault, that were just it's down, and whenever somebody fixes their login authentication, it's getting fixed. The worst outage I ever had is I was at Elastic, had an engineering all hands in Berlin. It was a great place, loved it. So all the SREs were there, right? And then we had and we did this to ourselves. Let me just preface this by saying because we relied on something that you should never rely on, and it's called Zookeeper, right? Half of the gray in this beard is from Zookeeper. So many things that and probably love and also hate. You probably love it if you don't have to actually do the operations for Zookeeper. And if you're on operations for Zookeeper, you absolutely hate Zookeeper. Zookeeper is the bane of your infrastructure, necessary as it may be.
Tell us what Zookeeper does.
Zookeeper is essentially it's a key value store. It's same as etcd, same as console, whatever like that. It's just operates in the tier just like anything else. It is for.
If y'all could see Tim's face right now while he's talking about how much you hate Zookeeper,
my eyes have changed. I'm back in Nam, right?
He looked like he'd been through some stuff. Tim's got trauma in the eyes.
But it's so it's a state store for like, state of this container, that container, whatever it is, you're going to do state store for. Like, same, like I said, same as console, same as etcd, whatever. Like, God, man, it sucked. So Zookeeper fell over, right? The reason I say we did this ourselves, because it was 2016, we're running with what Found.io had started, which was we were doing our own stateful Docker container management system that we wrote ourselves, right? This is before Kubernetes was reliable enough, right? And we used Zookeeper at the time because that's, I think, what Mesos was using, right? Which is also why you don't see nobody running Mesos anymore. I won't.
Shade.
But so we ran that, and it did like Zookeeper likes to do, and it fell over at 9:00 at night, Berlin time, on like a Thursday night, and everybody except the on-call was mostly based. So we had one, and we're all at a happy hour at the Western Spy Museum in Berlin, right? In former East Berlin, right? And Zookeeper is down and everything is blowing up. We got one on call who's cuddled around a laptop, and everyone else who works in engineering at Elastic, we're all various levels of intoxicated, trying to be as helpful as we can. Right.
Oh no.
And I wasn't the on call, right? But I think it was Ben. I think Ben was like sweating bullets, right? But Ben, he was also Australian, so he was kind of sweating bullets the way Australians sweat bullets. And it was like,
is that a different form of bullets?
They culturally, like they express stress differently than like Americans do, for sure. And like so we're all trying to help. And we have an international team. We got Spaniards, we got folks from two folks from Spain, a few Americans, a couple guys from Australia, stuff like that. And so it's just like everyone in their cacophony of languages and accents, various levels of intoxication, trying to fix Zookeeper. And it was as absurd as it sounds, is exactly how it was.
With one person typing.
One person typing, trying to fix
one
Zookeeper.
Laptop.
And so fixing Zookeeper is not a permanent state. Like it's like an electron, right? Yes, it is fixed now, but when you go back and look at it again, it's going to be broken. It's Schrodinger's Zookeeper. And so like we got it up and running, and then everyone was like kind of shook, but also celebrating. And we were now with this like semi-traumatized. Is it okay to party? Should we celebrate? I don't know. It's working, but no one ever. And so we were shook like the rest of the time. But yeah, that's probably my most fun outage.
I love that y'all were all partying in the poor one dude on call. I guess at least he wasn't intoxicated.
But we were all crowded around him in this spy museum, trying to be so helpful.
I love that you were supportive drunk people.
And to be fair, like helpful is relative, but the intent was there.
You probably made it worse.
We may have. Right.
Okay, so what was, maybe not just like technical wise, but what was your coolest job? Because you've had some like what is being a cloud economist like what it like there's, you've got so many layers. Like we heard about your DevOps career, but like what about, like I feel like you've
being a cloud economist is being a principal level SRE, right? But the thing you're solving for is cost.
How do you even get good at that? Like how do you like
be the one in charge of saving your company money sometimes before FinOps was an actual practice, right? Mm-hmm. And again, that's something we did. We did to some extent at Object Rocket, but we owned all our own hardware because you should. At Elastic, we used AWS and GCP and Azure to some extent. So that's really when you got into pulling levers on what costs what, where, and how much, and where should we run this and things like that. But also, once you start looking at the AWS builds, things start to make sense, especially when you're good at architecture. And then also, like I really got to see how the sausage was made at AWS, working there as a TAM, and some of the things that they were doing, not only to optimize costs, but to make sure they were still making their money on the backside. And so then when you go and then you compete against AWS in that aspect, you're kind of informed about how the processes work. But a lot of the things that you're going to buy that do cost optimization do like maybe 10% of what you could possibly be capable of, right? Cost optimization, I beat this over and over again about pretty much any problem. Cost optimization is done on the whiteboard, first and foremost, right? It's done on planning, it's done in your architecture, right? You cannot have a cost inefficient architecture and make up for it with AI or some like ML, we're going to reschedule containers using Kubernetes.
Because I think that's where a lot of people are right now. You know what I
Oh, yeah.
mean? People are
'Cause
not
it's
sure
easy.
if they want to go back to on-prem, if they want to own their own hardware, if they want to be in the cloud. They're not sure which cloud. So I feel like your experience is really relevant right now. Like, what was it like when you had 3 different clouds? Because people are selling multi-cloud everywhere. And it seems like the only startups that are really doing well are the ones that are observability into multi-cloud, because people want to be able to lift and shift and put things everywhere and nobody knows where they want to be. So like,
Oh yeah. Money's always in the data. Always money is in the data, and that's all observability is, right? That's why AWS charges so much for
CloudWatch.
CloudWatch. Thank you. Because I don't know. I mean, you use it because you have to, but nobody really wants to.
It's terrible.
It is the Zookeeper of observability. Oh, that's gonna hurt. I'm so sorry, CloudWatch team. That was unfair. That was unfair.
Now, you've said something in the past that I wanted to get some background on, where I know you've said that the cloud has made us irresponsible.
Oh, absolutely.
I would love to hear more about that.
So the reason the cloud has made us reckless, right, is because before times, and back then when it would take you a couple of weeks to spin up a VM, which consequently is what a lot of these startups still think is how it runs, and it's not like that. But we used to have to do forecasting, right? You have to figure out disk space. You had to figure out number of CPUs. You had to figure out network. You had to figure out, and you had to figure out what it cost, right?
A budget
before you could get a VM approved, right? Before they would launch anything for you, right? That was the thing. There was forms for it. There's a whole way of predicting and forecasting, right? And what the cloud says, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just spin up, we'll bill you for it later. Like, great, all right? Okay, so you didn't have no dev environments that were just sitting there hanging out, sucking up disk space. Not to the extent you do in cloud, right? You didn't have systems that just stayed on forever, right? You didn't have petabytes of data sitting out there unsecured in a bucket because you copied it somewhere, right? And then now somebody got in and grabbed it because you don't know how to secure it, right? You didn't have it like that back then. Not saying it never existed, but not to the extent it does today, right? Cloud has made us reckless because it's too easy to do things. You know, like there are people that have money, right? And then, you know, when they have so much money and the money don't really mean nothing to them, they just go and do anything with the money and they get a little reckless with it, right? Cloud is kind of like that. You have, in theory, or a promise of unlimited resources. So what does it matter how much, you know, traffic something takes, how much this, how much that, right? And then you get the bill. And then you're like, wow, this bill's a lot higher than I thought it was going to be.
Well, and you hide your bad architecture with bigger bills, right? You're just like, oh, that was a bad choice. And that was we just pay for it now.
Now we're just going to pay more for it, right? And what people say is like, oh, when you look, and I've done this before when I've done contract negotiation, I look at your bill, I'm like, your bill is hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, right? And it's going to keep being hundreds of thousands of dollars a bill a month, and it's going to keep going up, right? And your idea to save money is like, oh, well, I'm going to commit to spending this many $100,000 a month to AWS so I get a discount on my CPU with reserve instances or with a private pricing agreement. And I'm like, you've taken your very large OpEx and you're going to try and reduce your OpEx by turning it into a pseudo CapEx. Mm. You have functionally bought hardware
without the benefits. Yeah.
Yeah. But instead you're leasing it and you can't even claim it as depreciating assets on your taxes, right?
You know what's wild? For a while, it was like we had legacy tech where people would make these huge commitments and they would get stuck and then they'd take 20 years to move off of Cobalt. And then it got to the point where now people are lift and shifting like all these things and they keep going back and forth between on-prem and cloud. Like, where do you think this all settles out? Because people like, even now, like I've heard startups where they're buying hardware, but they're having it run for them in a data center.
That's exactly how you should be doing it.
Yeah.
And but there's like so many different options, and I feel like people are like, it's almost like nobody knows what the right answer is.
So my take on it is, I think more people are going to buy compute than are going to lease compute. If you have the money to do it, it is always more cost economic to buy your compute, especially if capacity is a concern, right?
What about the fact that you can scale in the cloud and you don't have to wait for the hardware. You don't have to.
You ever tried to provision instances in Azure?
Ooh, no. We don't play with that here.
You want to roll those dice, or whether it's going to be there when you need it?
Oh, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. What was your experience like when you were using 3 different clouds? Because I think that people talk about multi-cloud like it's the answer to everything. What was doing that in prod like?
It sucks.
Yeah.
and here's why, because like, wait, so you, in theory, you could write, it's like, oh, I could just write one Terraform code base and replicate it across. Like, it is more, you can do that more now, but you couldn't back then, and still don't do it great. The observability stacks were all different before OTel existed, before the, oh God, don't even look at your bills, right? They're just now at least starting with the FinOps Foundation just released, I can't remember what it's called, but a unified kind of billing format through all the cloud providers. But
that's why I'm wondering, like, how do you get real observability and like context into what you're even doing with 3 different companies?
You have to use a third-party tool, right? The one that I really liked, and this is not a paid endorsement, but the one I really liked was Cloud Health, right? Cloudability to some extent, but Cloud Health is really good about ingesting the stuff and lets you being able to visualize it from a resource usage and a cost standpoint, right? It is the one product from VMware that I think should continue on, and that's a spicy take.
You know what I think is wild?
What's that?
With all of the multi-cloud and all that good stuff, and then AI, like, I think what's the people that are really going to make money in the next couple of years are going to be the people that make really good tools for multi-cloud, because, or things to lift and shift, because that's what people seem to be doing right now. And the chip companies, because, like, when they say that, like, during the mining, like, gold rush back in the day, the people that made the money were the ones that sold the shovels.
Sold the shovels. Yeah.
So, like, I wonder if it's going to be the people that are making it easy to lift and shift from on-prem to like cloud, and the people that sell the chips.
I think that ship has already sailed. I think it is now the default that someone is going to run when you reach a certain size, right? Whatever a certain size of operations is.
Yeah.
That you are going to have a presence in more than one provider, right? Economically, right? Economically, it makes the most sense to buy compute versus reserving it, right? I know you reserve compute because you know you're going to need it, right? If I know I'm going to need it, I'm just going to buy it. And then I will get some like AWS essentially equivalent of savings plan for any kind of elastic or, unpredictable scale, right? My dev environments, I'm going to buy. My steady state compute, batch jobs, all those kinds of things that I know I need every day, day in, day out, I'm going to buy. I'm going to buy 90% of my GPU fleet. You know why? Because I can sell it when I'm done with it, right? But also, not every GPU needs to be newer, faster, whatever like that, right? For the vast majority of the work we do, the GPUs they have more memory, they have some abilities, but for the most part, you can still get by with 90% of the stuff you're doing with whatever you buy today, right? Or whatever you bought last year.
What happens when all this stuff goes on sale, though? You know what I mean? Like,
I'm so excited for all the GPUs to hit the secondhand market.
Yeah,
it's going to be so great.
But that's because honestly, that's what I want to know. Because like at some point, all these data centers that are being built, all this compute power that people are buying, like, what are we going to do with it when they realize that AI is not going to make everything better? Like, we are going to have such a surplus of these chips and compute power.
Yes and no, because people were using these GPUs to do inference and also like that before. Like, it's not going away, right? We may not have the boom of Gen AI like we do, but I don't think it's ever going to go away. But that's the beauty of buying it. I don't need it anymore. I can get some of this money back by selling it, right?
But do you think it's going to get to the point where everybody is going to have it and it's going to be like not even worth selling? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know how cars and
it drives the price down, right? It's the supply and demand. And that's not new, right? Because in the early 2000s, like .com boom, all these people got rid of servers, and a new breed of people that could do stuff off this cheap hardware. Like, hey, I don't need that big fancy thing. I just need a couple small pizza boxes and I can run my whole business off it.
What do you think powered the first Bitcoin miners for old servers? Like all people's old desktop that sell letter from the .com boom and stuff like that, right? The notion of buying it means that like when I'm done with it, I can sell it and get some of that money back. Is there a secondary market? Absolutely. There's already a burgeoning secondary market for buying, older or used GPUs and servers and stuff like that, right? Perfect. Let me make some money off of this, right? That's going to be far more economical than giving the money to AWS because I'm never going to see that again. You know what I'm saying? This is the difference between investing. This is the difference between like, I'm going to do this thing as an investment. I'm going to get some money back on it versus just giving it away to somebody else, right? But this is not a day one decision, right? Day one decision is growth, and it makes perfect sense to be in whatever cloud environments can allow you to grow, right?
Yeah, I think startups should start in the cloud and then figure out what you're using, and when you figure out your scale. But
the thing that I think where startups mess up is startups build in the cloud as if they're always going to stay in the cloud. And what you should be is agnostic as possible, because it may behoove you to be able to move at some point. And you need to make good architectural decisions in the beginning that don't make it extremely difficult or impossible for you to change down the road, right?
That's not even just for cloud though. I think that's for like there's so how many times have you seen like horrible tech debt come from the fact that people just didn't really spend a lot of time on their design and architecture in the beginning, even with databases. You know what I mean? Like
Load-bearing tech debt is what we call it. It's too expensive to now move.
it's just especially working in databases for a few years, seeing the way that people like did their database like schemas and stuff, and you're just like, but why would you do that?
You think Oracle database is still around because people are like, hey, you know, it'd be great for this new database, this new project, Oracle. Nobody does that.
Yeah. Like, so it's like, I think that is just sage advice in general in tech. You know what I mean? Really, like people always want to code and build something cool, but like it really pays to spend a little time up front.
Well, and I've completely changed my position on like good cloud architecture, where I think that lift and shift is the best model for the cloud because it's the easiest way to get out of it again. And the cloud should be temporary leasing, like you do if you go travel to someplace on vacation, right? You're not going to go buy a house. You're going to be there for a week and then you're going to leave. And that is how you should treat the cloud. You should lift and shift there, and then you should get out as fast as possible back to stable things that you own and you know the long-term costs of.
I think the most efficient way to run is by default to treat everything that you have as if it's spot. Because if it can go away, it means I can put it anywhere.
Yeah, I think you should do that in general. Like even when you're running on your own hardware, just because you always have options. Like, but and I think also just keeping it simple, because then like if you realize something no longer works for you, it's easier to change your architectures and you know how you do things.
You know how long it's taken some people to have to rewrite code just to be able to use ARM-based chips because they were very, very.
I don't know. I feel like we have all seen how tech debt goes wrong, and being able to make things neat and simple enough, for one, it's easier to fix, but it's also easier to add or to, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And you want to be able to modularize it. You want to be able to tear stuff out and replace it. Or like if I want to switch providers, it should be as simple as changing a target or a variable, right? That's the ideal. Now, the practicality is it's never that easy, but you want to try to reach that ideal. So that way I'm not hemmed into anything, right? That gives me negotiating power when I go to like negotiate a contract or I want a discount or something like that. Well, blah, 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 right? Because in theory, the only thing that should have any gravity is data.
Yes.
That's the only thing that's expensive to move. And that's why they charge you so much to egress. Is because if you do it right, that's the only thing that's going to take some time and hard to move. Compute should be agnostic.
That's the crazy part. I've learned so much going from a solutions architect and then being an engineer, because as a solutions architect, you're constantly telling people about like best practices and what you should do. And then when you actually have to go build those things, best practices don't always work, you know, but you have to find like a middle ground in between those to try to use as many best practices as possible.
Well, I'm sure like Tim practices jujitsu 6 days a week, and then he goes out and fights someone, and the practices help, but it's not the real world, right? When he's about to get punched in the face, then he has to actually adjust and say, oh, this is different than practice.
Y'all, Tim has one talk about, what is that one that you did? And it was all jujitsu. Like this is like the last one you did, or like one of the more recent ones.
Oh, the one talking about fundamentals versus techniques.
Yes. And like then you had all this, like you had a bunch of jujitsu, like, dude, it was like, it was so good because it was like this real life thing, and you were bringing this real life experience with these pictures and these visuals, but it was also talking about technology, and it was wild. Like it was such a good talk. Like usually, like sometimes you can get very like bored in the middle of a very technically depth talk, but you're like, okay, I want the information, you know? That talk was so good. Can you tell us more about that? Like just kind of how Justin like framed that and about how you do that?
So when we talk about techniques, and a lot of people in jiu-jitsu or anything talk about technique, right? Technique is the ideal way that something should work. So if I'm going to do what's called a scissor sweep, right? So I'm on my back and I'm in guard, right? I'm going to grab your lapel of your gi, right? I'm going to grab a sleeve, and then I do what's called a shrimp. So I'm going to move onto my side. I'm going to scissor my legs, and you're going to fall over on your side. And that's going to work pretty well in a drill, right? If I do it like that in a fight or roll, it's never going to work, because I have to understand the fundamentals behind why a scissor sweep works, right? A scissor sweep, a technique is the application of a fundamental, right? The fundamentals behind why a scissor sweep works is that I'm going to move your body to one side. So I have to take away a post. That's why I grab your sleeve, right? I need to control your posture and pull it down toward the ground, right? So that your shoulder hits the ground on a side where you don't have a post. That's why I pull your lapel, right? Now I need to shift your body one way and then take your hips out from underneath you, which is why I scissor my legs, right? So because I understand that I have to remove your post, I have to break your posture down on one side and then shift your hips. When I do a scissor sweep, if you see me doing one in a fight, I'm never going to do it like you see in class, right? It's going to look different because the scenario is everyone knows how to do a scissor sweep. So no one's going to let you do a scissor sweep, right? I need to find some way to control your elbow and break your posture down, whatever that looks like. And then I'm going to scissor sweep you. And you're going to wonder why you were able to be scissor swept when I didn't have control of your sleeve lapel, right? I understand the fundamentals of why something works. So that way I can apply it in any situation.
And know when to not use it in a real world. Like, is a scissor sweep the Zookeeper of jujutsu?
No.
Sorry, I was just trying to bring it back.
What's the Zookeeper of jujutsu? We're about to get spicy right here.
The jujutsu heads are I'm gonna get screamed at in Portuguese, but the Zookeeper of jujutsu are guard pullers.
Oh.
All right. The people that start a fight by sitting down, and under perfect ideal scenarios, that works just fine, right? Until you get a guy who knows how to pass guard and knows how to frustrate you. And then now I have someone who can move in any direction, up, down, side to side, around, and I've got my butt on the ground. I'm hoping to scoot faster than you can run.
That's really interesting because I feel like that's really simple and not what you would think. But also, like my son does jujitsu and I really want to do it with him if I wasn't so scared all the time. But I love the fact that so much of jujitsu is in your head and it's strategy.
It is chess, high stakes chess.
Yeah, but it's also like you can be so much smaller and still be very competitive at it.
Oh, yeah.
With someone bigger because it's so much strategy. And I think that is what makes you like such a very unique, like you are so effective in technology because for one, you have the fundamentals, you've done so many different jobs, you've done the actual like in it stuff, like the very high stakes in production, but you've also advised, but you are like to really be successful and to like really doing something operational, you need to be strategic. And there's so much like strategy and being in your head in jujitsu and being able to really think about how to get in someone else's head. And what you just said, that's literally one of the simplest moves, but like it's strategy, right? Like you're using a simple thing. And I think that's what makes you really good at your job. But it shows the intersectionality about like your other activities and how good you are technically and why you're successful in both.
This is what it comes down to is system and process analysis, right? Jiu-jitsu is just a system. It's just a collection of processes, right?
It is. It's amazing.
So is tech, right? And so when I talk about going back to having context for what you're doing, right? If you're just doing a scissor sweep, you're just going to you can do these moves and hope someone falls over. It's never going to work because you don't have context for what's actually going on. When you understand the fundamentals, now you see the context of what you're doing. Now you can apply what's going to work in that situation versus doing the technique, right? So a coder who just knows coding is all they know is going to type code. But if they understand the fundamentals behind how the infrastructure works and how your architecture is laid out and why things are the way they are, you're going to be able to make better choices about how you write code and how you fix problems.
I think that's a great place to wrap it up because we went full circle on this. So Tim, thank you so much for joining the show. Where can people find you? Where should they reach out online? And
oh gosh, I'm on Twitter at El Chefe. So if you want, mostly I talk adjacently to tech. I mostly don't talk about tech. I'll talk about dumb stuff, but I like to talk about whatever. I don't have a professional and a personal Twitter account. I just have the one. So, be advised. You can find me. I'm writing a blog. It's at tim-banks.ghost.io. It's on Ghost. It works out well. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me if you know what I look like, go to Twitter if you're not sure, and then go find me on LinkedIn. And that's mostly it. Like, if feel free to talk to me out in the conferences if you see me about. I'm actually a nice guy. I'm shorter than people think I am, only 5'8". But yeah, no, I'm happy to meet folks. And just don't be a jerk and I'll be nice.
If you want someone to make your whole day from inside of your phone, follow Tim on Twitter. Like, like make your whole day. Like, if you're having a bad day, go read Tim's tweets and you'll have a better one.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun.
It was so much fun. I had so much fun talking to you. I'm so glad to finally virtually meet you. Like,
yay.
Thank you so much, Tim, for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun. I don't think we've laughed that hard on any interview.
Oh my God, it was so much fun. Like I think I got 3 ab muscles from laughing at Tim. Okay. like, I don't have words. That was, I think this is my new favorite episode.
It was a good one. We'll mark this one as a recommended for sure in the feed.
Yeah.
For the outro here, because let's see, a lot of things have happened, and we got a couple links this week. It's just how we used to do intros. We're just doing a couple links now and talking about them a bit. Autumn, what do you got?
Okay, so I don't know if anyone saw it, but I feel like it's been pretty in the news lately. Google was going to acquire Wiz, and Wiz is, I don't know, how would you describe Wiz? Maybe an observability software?
Or
but
cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Security focused.
Yeah. I am a fan. Like, I think that their marketing's really good. I think their product can be used in a lot of really cool, like, multi-cloud observability security kind of settings. I've spoke with some of their product managers and people at like engineers at conferences. So Google was going to acquire them for what, like 27 billion, I think.
23 billion.
So people were like kind of freaking out because this is like one of the first really, really big acquisitions since tech has kind of been in, this tech recession. Like there's no more.
And it would have been Google's largest acquisition.
Yeah. So what is this, like 23 Motorola's or something like that? When Motorola was acquired?
Was Motorola $1 billion? I know Instagram was $1 billion. I don't remember what Motorola's was.
So like that's like 23 Instagrams, And this is after, like, we are no longer in zero
interest rate.
Yeah, so like think about, like, you are paying crazy interest. Like this is a lot of money for an acquisition. And so it was just kind of like people were shocked that Google was ready to pay this much money for a startup. And then they said, hey, never mind, we're going to IPO. We don't want your money, and turned it down. So that's wild because like the talk of this acquisition was so big, people were just like, they're going to do what? For how much money? And for them to turn it down, that, I mean, in this like era of people being really unsure about like the future of tech and like products, like a lot of people would have took that money and got out.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And looking back, I didn't realize Motorola was 2011 and they were $12.5 billion. And that was supposed to be an all cash deal for the shares because Motorola was a public company.
So that's 2 Motorola's and 23 Instagrams.
Yeah, and Google at the time, according to this article, Google had $39 billion in cash, and so they were spending $12 billion out of their 39 to buy this company that they later got rid of. Like they deprecated that purchase.
Well, that's why it was super interesting because we were just talking about the things that Google has shut down on another episode. So then it was like really funny because when the word of this acquisition came out, everyone was like, "Are they going to buy Wiz and deprecate it?" So it was like interesting. Also, like it was just like, what is your motivation for buying Wiz? I mean, I think it's a good company, but $23 billion in the times of not knowing, like we're talking about how we can't hire enough engineers in most companies and how we're cutting all these projects because of money, and they were down to spend $23 billion. Like what did they want so badly?
Yep. There had been something there, right? And also the fact that this is not an AI company, right? This is a security company. They might have a future of we're integrating AI into everything. I'm sure that's what Google may have saw in it, but who knows? Like there was something that was worth $23 billion to Google, and in that case, like they were offering that money according to, again, we're not on the back end of this. We don't know what the actual, like, was this all cash deal? The other thing that was interesting was Wiz raised $1 billion recently with a 12 billion valuation. So this was going to like double their valuation, but also $1 billion raise is $1 billion in raising money. And at this point, if you're exiting at $23 billion, you're only getting a 23 exit, right, on that last round. And so I think this was like their Series C or something. So they had already raised money. So I'm assuming that at some point, like the investors were like, oh, I don't want just a $23 X on my return. I want 100X. And in many cases, like, it's a big number, but also like compared to the amount of money that went into it, it's not that big of a multiplier.
I feel like you're still knowing that you're getting your money multiplied in a very like uncertain time. To walk away from, like, I mean, it is just very impressive to raise $1 billion right now. Like anything that's not AI is not getting a ton of money. I mean, ChangeGuard just, how much money did Change Guard just raise?
Yeah, Chain Guard just raised too. Yeah, Series C for them.
Yeah, Series C, they raised
It was hundreds of millions, but I don't remember.
140 million, which is impressive in this time with a 101.1 billion evaluation. Which, like, is this a shift that we're starting to go back and invest money into things that aren't just AI? Maybe
In both cases, security related companies, right? This is
yeah. So maybe that means we're finally spending more money in security and putting money into like important things and not just in the AI hype. I don't know, but like, what do you have to think your product is worth that you're like, nah, I don't want $23 billion like, of cash?
any company. If Google offers to buy you publicly, and then your evaluation in general is just going to go up, right? Because then at that point, everyone notices, oh, Google saw something in you, I will pay you more, right?
But
At
these
some
are
point,
all fake dollars, though. Like,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
There's
Like, a valuation's cool, but that's not the like money in your bank account. Like, you had the chance to put that money like in your bank account. You know, like, I mean, they weren't getting all 23 billion, but that's still, it's not exactly a little amount of money.
yeah. So I don't know. Interesting decision for them.
Tech is wild right now.
Maybe they see something in either the stock market continuing to grow or startups in general growing in the future. We'll see. My link of the week is a Wired story, which, sorry, it's paywalled. But for anyone listening to this podcast, you probably know things, archive.org and whatnot. But it's the full story of the stunning RSA hack, which is also from 2011 when Google bought Motorola. But I remember this story. I listened to a lot of security podcasts back in the day, Security Now, and various other security shows. And this one was brought up multiple times because it was always just like something happened and we don't really know what, but RSA being the keeper of basically like two-factor authentication before it was mainstream, right? Like if you had two-factor back in the day, you needed it for some reason, right? Like this wasn't like everyone had two-factor on their Gmail. I actually have a semantic two-factor here that was an RSA key back in the day, and I had it for, you know, finance investments or whatever. It was like some account, like they wouldn't let me have a strong password, so I'm like, send me a two-factor, and I've had it forever. But RSA got hacked back in 2011, and they stole the seeds for those keys, the physical keys. So you couldn't like reseed these with new keys and say like, oh yeah, just scan a new QR code. Like, no, these were physical devices that had it embedded in the hardware what the two-factor code was going to be.
So did they find out how it got stolen?
Yeah, well, yeah. So this is the story. There was always like speculation and stuff, and this was a really cool Wired article about like, yeah, it was basically a Excel spreadsheet that like gave them a backdoor that had a, you know,
wait, an Excel spreadsheet?
It was not a 0-day, but just some malware attached to it. It exploited Flash, and right, this is 2011. Flash was a big deal, so Excel spreadsheet exploited Flash. And the fascinating thing was they said that like this was done in it's not a sophisticated hack to like email someone something and they got, you know, a backdoor in. But the thing that was interesting was they said that this was actually someone else wrote on the back of that person's backdoor, and there was two hackers in their network, one through this Excel spreadsheet and the other one wrote on the back of the backdoor of the other team. And the other team was very sophisticated, and the other team was backed by Chinese government states trying to get the RSA private keys, and they're the ones that actually like forked off from this other group that initially got their foot in the door.
I wonder how they even knew that the other group got their foot in the door and then they exploited it. It's like the Trojan horse, but like wrapped up in an Excel file, but like two Trojan horses in one Excel file. Like that is wild.
The RSA hack was huge, like for security, because governments everywhere were using it. And this actually led to more companies like government contractors got hacked through this two-factor hack, right? So they stole the seeds of all the two-factor things, and then they used those to go hack into other companies because now they had their two-factor or ways to generate the correct two-factor codes. And this was like they had a server in a room that would burn CDs, and they would send the CD to a customer. And that customer had to like seed their server with those seeds. And so the initial seeds were still stored on the RSA servers, and that's the only place they existed, like where you can get them. And they went in, they grabbed, I forget how many gigs or
Wild.
Yeah, and so this had been a mystery for over 10 years as like, oh, this thing happened. I remember it happening, and now all of the NDAs for the executives have expired, so they were able to talk about it. And so I really enjoyed it just because I remembered when it kind of hit the news the first time, and I remember seeing there was like, oh, was that us? Was it actually from the RSA hack or not? And sure enough, like, yeah, there was definitely outfall from this hack happening.
That is wow. Like it's supposed to make it more secure. Just kidding. We gave it to everybody.
Well, and I mean, they were like, thinking, oh, we did our best, right? It was on a single server that was supposedly air gapped, but there was like one way to get into it because they had to keep seeding those seed files and burning CDs.
But how wild is it that an Excel file took them down? Like an Excel file. That's wild.
Oh, this is not the only place where Excel has taken down a company, I'm sure. I mean, but in general, that's just like how you get every word. The purpose is like, don't click on links, but like back in the day, it was don't open attachments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like don't open attachments for email. Now we don't have attachments in email. It's all links, right? It's phishing attacks. And this was just from the early 2000s. It was files. And that's how you got someone to click a link, and you got a backdoor, and you set up a listening server. And
it's amazing how the backdoors and all the biggest hacks are always something so simple.
Well, it's always the people, right? It's always the person that is the weakest link. And that's always where if you're looking at any sort of like postmortem for something that was a hack, it's just like, oh yeah, someone gave up something either through spear phishing or through some other means, someone got in the door. It's rarely ever this like amazing, 0 days you don't really hear about because no one knows they exist in a lot of ways. Like they shouldn't. So yeah, that was my link because I was reading that one and just was reliving what it was like almost 14 years ago, seeing this happen in real time.
It's very interesting.
So thank you everyone for listening to the show. And if you want to reach out, we are at shipit@changelog.com. We do read all the emails. I reply to most of them for guests or topics you'd like to hear about. And we'll talk to you again soon.
3, 2, 1.
Thanks for listening to Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Head to shipit.show for all the ways, or just search for Ship It wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find us. Thanks once again to our partners at fly.io, to the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder for these dope beats, and to Sentry. Use code CHANGELOG when you sign up and save $100 off their team plan. That's all for now, but come back next week when we continue discussing everything that happens after Get Push.